Miko's going to stay on stage now because he's also joining us for the next panel, which is looking at how airports can actually contribute to greener aviation. Luke Tickgat, who was going to moderate this panel, can't actually be with us today, but we found a more than adequate replacement for him in EASA. So please welcome onto the stage our Sustainable Aviation Program Manager, Dietmar Blömen. Dietmar.
Thank you very much. I would like also to immediately call for my panelists to join me on the stage. I'm very pleased to replace Luc. And also I'm very pleased to talk about this topic. Seeing also a lot of interest about sustainability and how to enable green airport operations. So I'll introduce in a minute the panelists who are going to have a nice discussion on sustainability. But maybe as an introduction, sustainability is something that we've heard about in the last 2 days a lot. And this is for an obvious reason. There is a need to decarbonize. There is a lot of pressure on the whole aviation business. Why? Because it is polluting. We are working towards it, but still we have a lot to work for. The Paris Agreement calls for a 1.5 degree limitation to warming. So this really sets the scene. And we have seen that a lot of initiatives is being taken. So a lot of goals are being set. I think Miko just said it in the introduction. There are roadmaps. The airport community is establishing roadmaps for decarbonization. The industry is joining together. We have seen about the Destination 2050 roadmap. And last but not least, also at ICAO level, 2 months ago, there was an agreement for a long-term aspirational goal to reach climate neutrality. This all is supported in Europe by the Green Deal objective, again, to decarbonize in general by 2050. I would like to go to a slide, we're not there yet. So there is work to do. And what is the environmental performance of the aviation sector today? EASA is being requested every 3 years to publish a European Aviation Environmental Report, where we really capture the environmental performance of the aviation sector, but also try to forecast how that will work, how that will evolve in the next years, and what kind of measures should be taken to mitigate that. And in the end, what would be the recommendations in order to approve that system? So there's a lot of mitigation actions possible. Miko already touched upon it. We have sustainable aviation fuels that is available today, maybe not at the quantities we want, but it's a solution that is there. But there's more needed. It's not a silver bullet that will save all of it. There's more needed, and technology is definitely needed, not only improvement of technology, but also radical new technologies such as hydrogen, electric, and hybrid flights. So that really leads us to come with a question on what can then the airport community do? How can we then achieve zero emissions? What are airports able to do to foster green operations and infrastructure? So the recommendation really is to incentivize and enable the development and implementation of necessary green airport infrastructure and operations, looking into the novel renewable energy sources such as SAF, hydrogen, and electrification. So this is really the topic of the panel. So what are airports able to do? How can they help? How can they be ready for the novel energy sources, the renewable energy sources, the ones that are maybe already available today, but not at the scale, and the ones that we are still all working towards too. So for this topic, I have a great panel with me today, which I will like to introduce. So on my left side, we have Blandine Landfried. So you're the head of climate and sustainable air transport at Group ADP. I know it was not easy for you to be with us, but I really thank you for making the effort. You are also the program manager for hydrogen developments at Group ADP. Then we have Peter Estee from Airbus. Peter, you are the head of ground operations and airport safety, a long history and a long list of experience working on the A380 programs. And now you're also the Airbus technology roadmap responsible, looking into airport ground systems and infrastructure. Then Mikko, you have been introduced. So you are leading the Finavia environmental unit. You're also responsible for the airport carbon accreditation scheme, and you're also very active in the Nordic Working Group on Aviation and Environment. And then we have Jan Petter Steinland from CA Norway. Jan Petter, you're the Director Strategy Analysis and Transformation. So at the Norwegian CA, you are very active in looking into innovative solutions and how to collaborate and contribute with that to the decarbonization. And then last but not least, Jonathan Wood, Vice President Renewable Aviation from Neste, the biggest or one of the biggest SAF producers, maybe the biggest. So you are leading Neste's Renewable Aviation Business Unit for the EMEA region, and you have a very long track of his experience in renewable and energy sources. So then, I would like to start with you, Blandine. So in your view, how should airports prepare for the energy transition, which is needed to decarbonize the aviation sector by 2050 in terms of facilitating at airports the supply of clean energy and fuels? And what needs to be done, and what are the challenges?
Thank you for the question. In Group AGP, we are convinced that the future of air transport and the future of our business relies on our capacity to collaborate all together to decarbonize air transport, and we really wanted to focus on how to accelerate environmental transition. Mikko has mentioned the role of airport in defining net zero roadmap. Of course, we have defined a net zero roadmap for our scope 1 and 2 for our direct emission, but we are also intend to make our airport net zero territory by 2050, including all the activities which are not directly in scope 1 and 2, but activities related to scope 3 including. It means that in our roadmap, we have including very strong commitment about how to be next or to foster air transport decarbonization, how we can accompany airlines or aircraft manufacturers to make the net zero air transport real. And as an airport operator, we think that the net zero relies on our capacity to make our airport energy low carbon or zero carbon energy hub, how to turn the airport into energy hub. And one of the first energy which will be required in airport is electricity, since we actually pave the way, all airports actually pave the way towards an intensive electrification, both for ground operation, because to reduce APU use, to electrify GSE, to experiment electric or taxi boat taxiing, and also to provide electricity to the new kind of electric or hybrid aircraft. And this intensive electrification, really required a lot of energy. Just to give you figures, for Charles de Gaulle Airport, it represents, we have to multiply by 2 the amount of energy required by 2030 compared to the amount of energy required, which was required in 2019. So it's a huge of energy which has to be delivered to the airport, and the airport have a big role to play, since we have to be sure to be supplied in renewable electricity, and how one of maybe the easiest way is to contract for green supply of energy through guarantee of origin. But airport can also tackle the subject by signing corporate power purchase agreement with renewable energy producer, with investing with green energy producer to make sure that a part of the green energy produced in the world will be dedicated to airport and aircraft operation. The second energy, which is about to make a boom at the airport, is the sustainable aviation fuel, thanks to incorporation mandate. Actually, there are already 7 sustainable aviation fuel which are certified. In Charles de Gaulle and Orly, we have a chance to be connected directly with refinery, thanks to a pipeline. So we are already able to operate SAF in Charles de Gaulle and Orly. In Le Bourget, we have installed several storage for SAF to supply our business jet. And once again, the airport have a role to play next to a SAF producer to secure or to foster the development of SAF, because we know it won't be so easy to have the amount of SAF required. So Group ADP in India, since we're also implemented in India, just like Aéroport de Paris seems to say, we have developed a project of sustainable aviation fuel production, and Aéroport de Paris is also thinking about the role the airport has to play in the SAF value chain to secure the production of SAF and to orient to make sure that the amount of SAF produced will be also dedicated to our airport. And in the Olga project mentioned by Miko in the introduction, we are partnering with Air France, and we have experimented a flight with 16% of blend of SAF in 2021 for a flight traveling to Montreal. On SAF, our role is really to be part of the value chain to foster the development of SAF. And then maybe the biggest or most disruptive energy, hydrogen, may be one also of the most promising in terms of decarbonization potential. We are tackling also the subject. We are tackling the subject on 2 stages. The first one is how we study how to turn our airport into local hydrogen ecosystem for territory usage. We plan to we already have 2 hydrogen refueling systems at CDG Orly for taxi, and we intend to develop 2 new stations in 2024 to also supply light-duty vehicles, to refuel heavy-duty vehicles, and also to refuel vehicle on air side, to refuel ground support equipment. And the second stage on which we tackle the preparation of the integration of hydrogen is for aircraft. We have partnered in 2021 with Airbus, and also with Air Liquide, which is one of the biggest French hydrogen experts. It's a huge company. And with Airbus and Air Liquide, we have led a cooperation in order to study how or what could be the hydrogen supply chain for 30 airports around the world. And we have also studied how to make a CDG and Orly hydrogen ready we have carried out a master plan study. We have assessed the LH2 volume required, the possible supply chain, the way to store and to distribute hydrogen, and also the cost. And thanks to this study, we have learned many interesting things. Maybe one of the most interesting at a European level is that the price of hydrogen will mostly depend on the price of electricity, whereas today the price of kerosene is quite the same all around the world. The price of hydrogen, because of the price of electricity, will vary a lot between countries. So it could bring also a kind of unfair the level playing field won't be the same anymore. The price of hydrogen will become a lever of competitiveness of airport. That's why airports should also tackle the subject by thinking about how they could play a role in the value chain of hydrogen, to be sure to have enough amount of hydrogen, but also to have hydrogen at the lowest price possible, because it will be a lever of competitiveness. During our study with Airbus and Air Liquide, we have also studied how to implement hydrogen infrastructures on airport, and there will have several phases. The first phase between 2035, which is the entry in service of zero emission aircraft, between 2035 and 2040, mostly the supply chain will rely on trucks. There will be hydrogen farms or hydrogen producing farms located away from the airport, and trucks will make will supply the aircraft between these farms and the airport. And as 2040, we think that liquefier and hydrogen storage will be necessary at the airport, and of course the ramp up will follow progressively the penetration of the hydrogen aircraft. And to distribute this hydrogen to airport, there will be two main possibilities, just like today with kerosene. The first one is with trucks, and the second one is with cryogenic pipelines. Just to give you an overview, for CDG and Orly, on one of the most optimistic scenarios, it could represent up to 700 of hydrogen per day required for Charles de Gaulle, which is enormous, and 350 tons of hydrogen per day in Orly. And because we love master plan as airport operator, we also try to design a large airport hydrogen fuel farm, just to have an overview of what it could consist in. And for big airports, it would require as of 20 hectares to implement an hydrogen infrastructures, including liquefier storage, part of production, and a module to distribute hydrogen to the aircraft. Here I present really the subject under the infrastructure angle, but we have also started to tackle the subject under a regulatory angle with Airbus. We really try to understand how the hydrogen aircraft will impact the actual regulation. We study all the aircraft process from landing to takeoff, and it's not so easy to define exactly what could be the change and how to tackle this change under a regulatory point of view. But we know that it will be one of the key success of hydrogen will be to be ready in terms of regulation in airport, and we know also that we will need standards across Europe and all around the world, of course, about how to cope with new aircraft under a regulation point of view.
Thank you, Blandine. Yeah, that's clear. So it's also encouraging to see that Group ADP is looking at the short-term solutions with SAF, but really looking very detailed on hydrogen. And yeah, you were referring to the cooperation with Airbus, and yeah, that brings me to the next question, Peter. Airbus is very ambitious, so by 2035, Airbus would like to bring to reality a hydrogen-powered aircraft. So yeah, of course, this is something that you cannot do alone, and the collaboration with airports is extremely necessary, as we just heard from Blandine. But in general, how is Airbus getting ready for this in terms of your hydrogen plans, and what are you doing in collaboration to really achieve that point?
Okay, thank you very much, Dietmar. So really thank you for having this opportunity to share with you the challenges we have with this. It's always easier to climb a mountain together than to try to do it alone. But before going to the challenges, I would like to spend 1 minute on the ZEROe project, because not everybody may know what this is all about. It is a project in Airbus. We launched 2 years ago. We are looking at 3 different aircraft configurations, a turboprop, the one you see in the back, which is a short regional aircraft, 100 pax, 200 nautical miles version, turbofan. You see the one in the front. And then a more exotic one, which is a blended wing, which gives us a lot of new possibilities to store hydrogen on board. But this aircraft would have additional challenges for the airport than just hydrogen. So, as you said, 2035 is the introduction date of this of one of those configurations. It's very important to know that all those 3 they are based on liquid hydrogen. We are not looking at gaseous aircraft, gaseous hydrogen aircraft. So I think it is clear now that we are looking at the whole ecosystem, because it's fine to bring an aircraft to the market with is operating on hydrogen, but if there's no hydrogen on the airport, it doesn't serve the purpose. So this is something we recognized very early. And the main challenges, Blandine already touched on that, is the production of hydrogen, bring the hydrogen to the airport, store the hydrogen on the airport, then distribute it to the aircraft. What does that mean also for the footprint? You just saw the factory Blandine had on Charles de Gaulle. And also the impact this kind of hydrogen operation has on the other activities you have on the airport. We still have to turn around kerosene aircraft. We also want to do all the activities we do during a turnaround when we do refilling with hydrogen. So these points are all challenges which we are looking at. And the way we are looking at this is partnerships. Blandine just showed already the partnership we have with ADP. We have different partnerships all over the world. We are looking at different sizes of airport. We're looking at different suppliers of hydrogen, and we're looking at different aircraft operators. So we try to have a kind of global view on what hydrogen introduction would mean on the different sizes and different parts of the world. Those partnerships are really for us to understand the constraints of each of the stakeholders on the airport. I'll come back to that a little bit later. I should change the slide. Because it has been said in the past 2 days, an airport is a complex system of stakeholders. It's not easy. So we have to look at all those stakeholders. What are the constraints they have, and how can we address those constraints? And the objective is to build together a roadmap so that we can bring the introduction of hydrogen to a successful situation. And this is very much linked to the time we introduce the aircraft, but also how much the network is going to develop. So it's really an interaction between the aircraft manufacturer and the operators and the airport to find out how is the traffic of hydrogen aircraft going to develop on my airport. So it's a really detailed work which you have to do with each airport. I think, well, you see here the main stakeholders, and as we are in an EASA conference, I think we should spend a little bit more time on the regulatory. Blandine, you already mentioned this is a big challenge. There is not much in terms of regulatory today existing. And we have the situation where we're not only looking at aviation regulation, which is typically what we deal with, but as we are now with an airport, we need to look at the supply of hydrogen to the airport. We're looking at all the regulation also for on the civil side. So we have set up, we started from the bottom. We set up in France a working group where we, together with all the stakeholders, the regulators, aviation and civil, we started to look at what kind of new risks are we introducing with this kind of hydrogen operation. And we have set up a matrix for that. It's just the first step. The next steps will be how are we going to mitigate those risks. And following this, I think we can come up with the right recommendations and regulations to make sure that those risks are well managed in the world. This is a bottom-up approach. We started in France because we wanted to do something very quickly during COVID times, so that was not easy, but we managed to do that. But we also have to do the top-down. We wanted to discuss with ICAO how can we handle this. And ICAO gave us an action as an industry. They said, give us first a complete view on what you think will change in terms of annexes, in terms of manuals and documents on the ICAO side. So this action we have taken up in the IIWG, the International Industry Working Group, and we have set up a task force to handle this, which is called the Alternative Aviation Fuel Compatibility Task Force. It's a mouthful, but we started the task force 2 or 3 weeks ago, first kickoff meeting. And the objective of this task force is to define for ICAO the list of documents and annexes to be modified. Because we have a clear objective here, we want to create as quick as we can global regulations, and also, you already mentioned it, global standards. So in parallel, we're also discussing with SAE and ISO. Sorry, something disappeared there. There should have been, yeah, it is there. So this is just showing you a global map where we have plotted in the partnerships we have today up and running. We're still looking at other areas. You can see South America, Africa, they're still blank. We have focused up to now in those areas where we know that there is a lot of attention to hydrogen in the public domain. There's also funding in the public domain to work on those subjects. Also, those areas are more mature already in terms of hydrogen production and usage. This is just a start, and we will continue with that. So the partnerships, okay, we have to be global. We have to look at the variety of different sizes of users. And as you see now, we are present in North America, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region. We look with all those partnerships into the supply chain, the infrastructure, the operation we can plan. And we discussed the creation of hubs. As ADP already said, it's a possibility for airports to play a new role. And I think yesterday was also a presentation on that. It could be a new value proposition for an airport. Look at other users on the airport who could profit from hydrogen. So if you take an airport from an aircraft perspective, as I said in the beginning, we introduced in 2035 an aircraft based on liquid hydrogen. But we all know there are other actors in the aircraft OEM business who are planning to introduce gaseous hydrogen aircraft, and they will hit the market earlier. So you will probably see an airport will start with gaseous delivery to aircraft. At the same time, the airports can start to deliver gaseous hydrogen to other users. We can think about GSE and buses and trucks on the air side, but you can also think about the public domain. What about the public transport, the taxis, things like that. That's all building up in the roadmap the level of, or the quantity of hydrogen you're going to look for. And at a certain point in time, you will see that it is more efficient to supply liquid hydrogen to an airport and store it, even if you have only gaseous users. And we believe with this kind of development of users, we will be in time in 2035 to have actually liquid hydrogen on the airport available. So this is how we are planning, together with all the stakeholders, to get the world ready by the time we come with these aircraft.
Thank you, Peter. It's really challenging. 2035. It seems like a long way, but it's not.
Well, regulatory, we all know, it takes a lot of time to get the right regulation on the table.
Which is why we are here today, and
Exactly.
which is why we should indeed talk about that. You're right. So thank you. Mikko, maybe, we talked a bit now about SAF and hydrogen and what airports can do, but maybe let's take a step back and also look what airports themselves can do. This is also important. And what is your view on how Finavia is approaching the net zero carbon emissions from its own operations? And how does Finavia tackle that?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, we have a roadmap for net zero carbon in place, but let's first have a look at the airport network we have in Finland. So a big country, 20 airports run under the one company. Distance from Helsinki to Ivalo is 1 hour and 40 minutes. My flight from Helsinki here took something like 2 hours. So that gives an understanding of the distances in the north. And you can guess that many of these airports are very small, only 2 flights a day. Well, in Lapland, much more, and Helsinki was plus 20 million before pandemic. But the emissions come from the use of fossil energy. So you have to look at first, where do you consume your energy? Where does it go to? In the full network of 20 airports, 25 gigawatt hours goes to vehicles and machinery. So whatever those are, but the biggest group of consumption is for snow removing machinery, those huge snow plows, making clear of the snow on the runway during the winter time. Heating takes 55 gigawatt hours throughout the network. Heating is needed, well, due to the cold temperature. Electricity, 80 gigawatt hours, it represents 0.1% of the total electricity consumption in Finland. In southern countries, electricity is much more dominant compared to heating energy, or heating or thermal energy is not used at all, because everything is hot water and everything is made by electricity only. And then there's also the use of energy power generators, and they run on fossil fuels. Energy efficiency is the first point to reduce emissions. When building new infrastructure, for example, you have to push the engineers to make things better than business as usual. One way of reaching that is to imply environmental building standards like BREEAM or LEED. And in the Helsinki development programs, we set a target for reaching excellent in the BREEAM classification. Then we have reached in the EASA program, which has helped us a lot, level 4 plus in Helsinki airport and in Lapland airports. And we can say that at the moment we are carbon neutral, but that is not the goal. The goal is to be a net zero carbon. But what do we need to do to reach that? Well, as said, get rid of fossil energy. Vehicles and machinery will switch to renewables only if they run on piston engines. But before that, we electrify all the lighter vehicles. That is possible. But the big snow machines, you never make them run on batteries. They just can't cope with the power demand. We have the opportunity to use renewable vehicle fuels provided by the oil company called Neste, whose representative sits on here but talks about SAF today. We have the opportunity to distribute renewables to all of our airports throughout Finland. Heating goes to geothermal power, or we get, if that is not available, then green thermal energy from the district heating systems, which basically heat all the major airports and cities in Finland. They are turning green in a very fast pace. Electricity, we produce some solar electricity already ourselves today, but basically we continue sourcing all the electricity as green wind power also in the future. And all fuels we use will go to renewables bit by bit. And we estimated that in 3 years' time we will have less than 200 tons of carbon CO2 left, and that we will then eliminate with carbon credits and carbon capture and storage projects. So bit by bit, in 3 years, starting next year, we will go to implement these measures I just listed, and in the end of 2025, we wish to have airport carbon accreditation schemes level 5 for the full airport network, certifying that we have reached a status of a zero carbon airport operator. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, we talked about zero emissions by 2050. Airports themselves will also have a very important role, and I think you clearly showed how Finavia is already very committed to that already now by having net zero emissions very soon. So, Jan Petter, you work for the Norwegian CAA, Norway. Norway is also a country which may have interesting climate conditions and settings to facilitate maybe electric flights, hydrogen flights. But you also see it important in Norway to collaborate. So what is your view on that collaboration in order to facilitate those energy sources at Norwegian airports or airports in general? But also Norway as an EASA member state, what is the role of the member state in this process of getting those airports ready for those renewable energy sources?
Oh, thank you, Dietmar, and thanks for the invitation here. We really appreciate it. Now, I think in the last 2 days we heard many different perspectives, and I think that is of strong value. Listening to the different roles, how they see their roles, how their perspectives are. And I will talk a little bit focusing on the state perspective and also us as an authority within a nation, and look at the collaborative issues there. So I would just like to begin underlining that it sort of starts with our mission as an authority. Now, we could have sort of leaned back and concentrated on safety and concentrated on these issues I've been working so hard on all these decades. But now we see that we also have to be more vigilant and on the offensive regarding benefit to society, but also now the sustainability. I see the text is rather small. What you can see here in this in my original slide was that we have a number of airports. We have 56 commercial airports in Norway, which of 43 or 44 are controlled by Avinor, state-owned company. So that's a strength actually. And as you say, Mikko, in Finland as well, Norway is even longer stretched. We have more airports, and this is part of our societal structure. And that's why we think it's really good that we should be at least pushing for some development that could facilitate this kind of a marketplace. So I think this value of having a strong regional aviation network is something that is really important in this early phase of new technologies, because it's both electrical and hydrogen, but also SAF is playing a role here. Now, it sort of starts at the top, because the Ministry of Transport has given us a clear mission. Both to us and Avinor, we've been given a mission to already now make it easier for innovators to use the aviation system for testing. I remember a conversation with Airbus a couple of years ago with Glenn Llewellyn. He talked about the value of OEMs, manufacturers, and innovators. The value of having access to the aviation system in total was very high. And this is something we've been working hard on, because we're a small country, but we're so dependent on aviation that really trying to facilitate innovation and accelerate the innovation is maybe our prime mission. Now, we also are, actually the government is buying a lot of PSOs, public service obligation routes, because the market is so thin at places that the government has to buy or subsidize flight routes. And that's quite substantial. So we're now already looking at how we can incorporate climate requirements for the new tenders being given within the PSO system as soon as the technology is relevant. And I think this is one example of how we can, by creating some incentives also in the future, give some added motivation for the different manufacturers to see that, yes, there is a market. And I will also underline that we really believe in these new, I would say, radical technologies on electric, whether it be hydrogen-based fuel cell or it's all electric with batteries even for the very short flights, or hydrogen combustion, etc. Now we talked about, we heard this mentioned many times. It's an ecosystem. But again, it's an ecosystem depending on your perspective. So also, Peter, you were touching on from an Airbus perspective. Yes, this is an ecosystem. I fully support you. I find many of the same wordings and the same perspectives. However, it's also important that we each have different roles. So even if Peter is talking about an ecosystem and sort of handling it from their side, we have to also have the same perspective, but in our role. So now we see that something that strikes me also today, here, when we sit here, it is aviation talking to aviation. One of the findings in the last 3 to 4 years being quite targeted at saying, what is this ecosystem? We also see that the energy sector needs to be mobilized to a high degree. We need a higher level of dialogue with them. We know we are in shortage of energy. It will be, it'll get worse. You know, where can we find the renewables? Where do we find the hydrogen? How does this compete with shipping, with even if trains start to use, for example, hydrogen or bio-based fuels? And the investment sector, the finance sector, is also another sector that is obvious to me or to us in our work. We need to work tightly with them, and we're now more and more connecting some of these environments to the case of aviation. And I think we have seen a lack of lifting these discussions on what is important for aviation. So we really see that as one of the roles we need to fill. All right, so what we did in Norway, this is just an example of what we did, you know, on a national side, but we say that we do not solve anything nationally. Nothing. We always have to work internationally. So we just kicked off this collaborative effort in Norway to sort of join forces to be able to collaborate internationally in a way that makes sense. So we, as an authority, we started a collaboration with Avinor as a state-owned infrastructure owner, and with the industry sector, and also with the research sector. And then we started this program. And this is supposed to be an open, including, level playing field area where the different innovators can have access to the aviation system. And we try to identify pilot projects, we try to identify issues that that should be addressed. And we also are, of course, in close dialogue with the different EU bodies as well, and EASA. We have also engaged in an innovation partnership agreement with EASA a couple of years back. We're now really using this to try to collaborate with EASA to see what within this regional aviation segment, what issues should we address, and how can we get something out of this collaboration. Now, what we're trying to do with this collaborative effort, because we hear collaboration all the time being mentioned, and then we try to do something quite concrete of this. Because if you look at this from a principle point of view, if you say that the technology itself is being developed at level 1, then there's the OEMs finding together and working collaboratively to develop an aircraft or a driveline or infrastructure on ground. But then there's the other level, which is the aviation ecosystem. How does this follow? We heard this before, but this is so important to underline this, and we have to come back to it all the time, I think. If you develop an infrastructure or an aircraft, how does this impact training? How does this impact airspace structure, airspace procedures, etc.? Now, and then there's the third level. How does this impact society? And this is something that sometimes is a little bit lacking. How can society benefit from a different mobility system? We heard about the eVTOLs today. And of course, in a regional perspective, with regional aviation, eVTOLs will be an integrated part of that. And then just a bit on you talked, Mikko, a lot about the airport and how you see it. And Avinor, I think in Norway, with their 43 plus airports, they see pretty much going along the same lines, but of course there are different figures and numbers. So they have a target of being fossil-free within 2030. Now, looking a little bit at supporting new technologies. If you look at the electricity to begin with, there's already been mapping of, are we able today to support a massive increase or a large increase in charging of aircraft? Of course, in the beginning, the volume will be small, probably no problem on most airports. But if you look at each and every airport, you have to really map the whole system. And for us, we have flights from 40 kilometers up to 150, 200 kilometers, quite a number of them. So these electric aircraft, whether it be hydrogen fuel cell based or actually battery as well, they could be really in focus for the next 5 to 10 years, could be quite significant for them. So a couple of the conclusions there right now is that you should normally be charging directly from the grid. That makes the most sense. But in some of the smaller airports, if you have then, you can handle one aircraft, but you have 2 or 3 aircraft at the same time, you need some kind of accumulator or battery storage capacity. And the cost is not insignificant. Now, another interesting find is that in Norway, we've been subsidizing electric cars quite heavily. So now we have passed this critical point. Now, today, 80% of all new cars are electrical. I think to a Norwegian family, it's inconceivable to buy a fossil car for a normal family unless they have very specific needs, because now the range of the car is going far enough. So actually, the situation on airports today is that all these cars that want to charge, and also the rental cars, they are maybe the biggest load factor right now. And of course, when you put aircraft on top of that for charging, that's the total sum of it. And I expect this electric car development to proceed within Europe as well. And then they're also looking at, on the airport, we'll be needing energy storage. And also, I will show you a map shortly about hydrogen production. It could also be an issue to produce hydrogen on the airport itself, because it's often co-located to ship ports. And then, of course, on the air side, there will be different utilities and eVTOLs, etc., for charging. Now, this map is quite interesting. This shows in the green circles is where they are planning hydrogen production. Some of these are already in production. There'll be green hydrogen and some blue hydrogen on the where you see the blue circles. And Some of these magenta or lilac-colored circles are airports. So some of them will be co-located or quite close to the production sites. So you talked about hydrogen, access to hydrogen. This is a report made just recently and showing some of the network of hydrogen production. But there's a lot of work to be done to actually get this in use and also have the infrastructure on the airports. 2 words on SAF. Avinor, as a supplier, or the airport owner, they have supplied biofuels from 2014. And we also see now that there are both e-fuel production being ramped up in Norway, very early stage, because I think the e-fuel production efficiency needs to improve quite a lot. And then, of course, rather large advanced biojet fuel factories as well. Now, the last slide I have is this point you mentioned, Dietmar, on being an EASA member state. For some reason, the words are getting really small in this version. But the first is about the safe development in integration of technology. I think we need to collaborate, not just EASA and one state, but we as several states, we need to collaborate to see how we can support both the safe development, but also the integration of the technology. So that's one thing we need to collaborate on. The other is actually providing guidance, providing basic aviation understanding and insights into all these new players to aviation, whether it's politicians, whether it's the energy sector not quite understanding what is happening, whether it's startups with brilliant new ideas, but they maybe spend 2 or 3 years before they actually understand aviation. And then the third point here would be to drive for general international collaboration, also on a global scale, because there are very interesting developments in other continents, in other regions. And then finally, of course, we talked about the regulatory side. We need to address things early and develop in parallel. So I think this, as an EASA member state, we need to contribute in our analysis and sharing our insights with both EASA and other member states to see how do we approach this from a regulatory perspective to have the changes. But also when innovators are coming to us to have new solutions approved, whether it's with EASA or it's actually national regulation, we should have been on board for the process, because then the certification or authorization phase will be smoother, expected so. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Petter, and yeah, very, very interesting what you say. The collaboration is key in this aspect. New stakeholders, as you say, are entering, and maybe if I say a SAF supplier is there, but it's relatively new compared to the known sector of aviation. So that brings me to you, Jonathan. So yeah, Neste, it's the biggest SAF supplier. I would be great if you can tell us a bit more about what you do. But you have the solution available already. You're delivering it already, but at, let's say, smaller scales, and that's the challenge for all of us. It needs to be scaled up, and at the same time, the airports need to be ready to accommodate that scaling up effort. So how do you see that as a SAF supplier? How can airports and you as a supplier work together to really ensure that scale up is possible? And before you answer, I would like to remind the delegates that we have Slido. I see there's already a lot of questions coming in. After you, we will immediately jump into that. So Jonathan.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. As a fuel supplier and renewables leader amongst one part of the aviation ecosystem, the airport industry. I mean, just a reflection, listening to my fellow panelists here, we as Neste may not be familiar to you all, and I'll say a few words about Neste, but we have a relationship with each of you. You know, Norway has been a leader in driving forward renewable or sustainable aviation, and was the leader in terms of taking SAF into a commercial airport, into the infrastructure system. And I dare I said I was involved in that back then, so I've followed the journey. Finland, the home of Neste, has SAF today being supplied into Helsinki. And Airbus and Airport de Paris, France is an aerospace leader. We only yesterday were together at a summit in Toulouse talking about how we want to drive to 100% SAF being accepted in all aircraft. And indeed, we are supplying SAF into Paris. France has, following the lead actually of Norway, already mandated the use of SAF. So this is happening today. It's a mandated requirement that a certain percentage of all fuel is supplied in Norway and indeed in France. And I was in Paris only a week or two back as we were supplying SAF into aircraft to go to COP. So this is happening, and I guess that's the key message, even though you can't see it on here. This is a solution for today. Yes, we clearly need all the solutions to play a part, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's electric, whether it's operational efficiency. But SAF is here today, and as you'll hear in a second, we're on the runway and ready to ramp up, quite frankly. But this is urgent. We all know that we can't wait another 10 years. Fit for 55, the idea is that we reduce by 55% our emissions by 2030. So we can't afford to wait another 15 years. Hydrogen is absolutely got a role to play, but SAF is something that we can move forward today on, and we need to work on it all together. And I think those signs are very positive there. So I will talk a little bit about Neste, just a couple of words, then what SAF is all about, where it is, and in particular the demand and supply outlook, and then in particular also the role that airports can play in that. But a couple of words about Neste. We are a Finnish company by origin, an oil marketing or refining and marketing company which developed a real speciality and expertise in dealing with difficult feedstocks, and then made the decision 10 to 15 years ago to basically refocus on renewable feedstocks. So basically our mission is to eliminate fossil fuels, to not take out crude oil out of the ground, but rather recycle the carbon that's in our ecosystem. So what we're doing today is we're producing renewable fuels for road transportation and now also for aviation, and indeed also feedstocks for the chemical industry, where we're basically taking waste materials, oil-based waste materials, and recycling them. That's really our purpose, and we were then critical in getting SAF, made from recycled waste materials, approved back just over 10 years ago, and started the first flights with SAF back in 2011, the Hamburg-Frankfurt route with Lufthansa, and then subsequently bringing it into Oslo and elsewhere. And the other key message here is because we're a new player, and I joined Neste 2.5 years ago when we set up the aviation unit, we recognize that we need to work with other players in the ecosystem. So the established oil cos, who I know well since I come from one, we will work with them, but we will also supply direct where we can. So really recognizing what we can bring, but working with partners. So what is SAF? Well, it's made from recycled waste materials. Use cooking oil, for example. And the key message here is it's a drop-in solution. So you don't need to change your infrastructure in order to be able to have it at your location. And furthermore, apart from the GHG, greenhouse gas reduction of about 80% versus the fossil fuel alternative, it also delivers other benefits beyond the CO2 element, namely reduced particulate emissions of between 50 and 70%. There's more research being undertaken with organizations like Airbus to prove this out further. But in fact, the climate change impact is probably underestimated because, or the benefit, I should say, is underestimated because of these reduced particulate emissions, which have not only a benefit from a CO2 point of view, but also in other emissions around the airport. And so, in effect, what we're doing, because we're recycling carbon that's in the ecosystem, we've got as this graph shows, about an 80%, but using CORSIA methodology, about an 80% reduction versus the fossil fuel option. So there you see it just, visually, in case you didn't believe the research and the stats on this. And as I said, this is a drop-in solution that can be brought to the airports without any change to infrastructure. Yes, there's a huge investment in the sourcing the raw materials, which is not easy. It's much easier, quite frankly, to dig a whacking great big hole in the ground and have, hundreds of thousands of gallons pouring out. Here we have to source it from small, a very fragmented supply system, but that's quite costly. But then the investment in the production facilities, but then we bring it together with fossil fuel into a blending and storage terminal, because as I'm sure you're all aware, right now it's only approved up to a 50% blend. But as I say, I'm confident that we'll get to a stage where it's accepted up to 100%. But from those blending and storage terminals, we then bring it to the airport into the refuelers and hydrants. So no change required. There's a rigorous certification and verification process, so we can track what, and it's audited, what raw materials we've used and hence what carbon saving we're achieving versus the fossil fuel equivalent. And the point to make here is you don't need to have blending at the airport, and quite frankly, many airports don't have the space, especially the larger commercial airports don't have the space. It's quite costly to then have dedicated tanks. So what we do is we blend it and then recertify it as Jet A1, and then put it in the pipes and the railway and road systems to bring to airport. So the good news is, over the last couple of years, is it really now is in place in an awful lot of places. I would say Northern Europe is clearly a leader, California and the west coast of the US also, because of very helpful policies, and a number of airlines and indeed oil distributors bringing it. So Neste has got now production in Finland, but we're expanding that for SAF, building on our existing renewable road fuel production, into the Netherlands, into Singapore, and indeed we've got an investment now underway in the US. So really, in all of the major aviation regions of the world, we're bringing production on stream. But the good news is there are other players also who are now announcing projects. So we're really supplying commercial airlines, business aviation. We're supplying legacy carriers, full service carriers, also low cost carriers, and as I said, the distributors. So, but this is a huge investment, billions of dollars in the production, in the sourcing of the raw materials, and indeed, as we look at the future production technologies into green hydrogen and renewable power, is going to be essential. So we're talking about actually trillions. This is a revolution. It's a subset of the broader energy transition that we've got to go through as a society. I would say it's as big as the digital revolution or the industrial revolution. We're talking trillions of dollars. And the HEFA-based production method that we are scaling up is tried and tested. The other future production technologies have a bit of a way to go. So our quite high risk, and this is where policy to underpin the demand side and to help support and nurture the new technologies is absolutely essential. But what you see here on the chart are some of the mandates that have already been implemented in France and Norway, for example, but are coming in the EU from 2025, and also incentives, which is the model that is being employed in the US, although it is actually off of a broader renewable fuels mandate. So the positive news is policy is coming into place, but it's absolutely essential to underpin the investments. But what we as Neste have already committed to are investments that are underway right now. A couple of $1 billion in Singapore, a couple of $1 billion announced in Rotterdam. So we are moving from production capacity of 100,000 tons. We are multiplying that. We are growing that 15 times over the next year. So we will have production capacity of 1.5 million tons. And to put that into context, that is more than the proposed mandate for the whole of Europe for 2025. That is more than the 2% mandate for the whole of Europe, including the UK, for 2025 in 12 months' time. So we are putting our money where our mouth is here. We've got the funding support, but that is still a challenge for the smaller companies and even quite frankly, for some of the larger oil cos. And it doesn't stop there. We've got more investment coming on stream through 2026 and beyond with the new production technologies. And that's really key to the future of SAF availability, is scaling up beyond the 10% that we're projecting here with the current commercially proven production technology into new feedstocks and production technologies, including renewable power, to get to decarbonize the whole of the industry. But what I wanted to mention here also is there are schemes over and above mandate policies that we are pushing forward to help promote the voluntary additional use of sustainable aviation fuel already today. We're working with corporates who are voluntarily electing to buy SAF to reduce their emissions in the business aviation sector and also in the cargo sector. And these voluntary schemes, I think, are really essential to get us in those sectors that have targets and have the capability to pay the incremental cost to already kick us off. But then also the airports have a role potentially in supporting those voluntary schemes, but also in terms of promoting and supporting the policy discussions, but then also in terms of potentially providing incentives. Here I've got a couple of examples of incentive schemes that different airports have put into place to help promote and encourage airlines to use SAF. Clearly, airports need to balance your books in terms of your revenue streams, but you can differentially advantage those airlines who commit to use a certain proportion of SAF. And here you've got funds of many millions of dollars for different airports. So in short, we're on the runway and we're moving, we're working together. It's going to be a long journey requiring billions and billions of dollars, but the airports have a definite role to help the policy discussions, help even potentially promote with incentive schemes, but have already been, I think, as we've heard from the stories already, you've been playing a fundamental role in getting this going.
Thank you, Jonathan, and really impressive that you're able to deliver the amounts of SAF demanded by the proposed RefuelEU legislation. So that's really encouraging to hear that it will be possible. So we're nearing almost the point where we can have some questions and answers via Slido. But maybe before we go to that point, maybe a question for all the panelists. So what should policymakers and regulators do in order to help the airports to be ready for the new energy sources? So we've touched upon it already a bit, but maybe Mikko, if I can start with you, what would be your view? What kind of policy would be needed, if not yet there, to help the community?
Okay, thank you, Dietmar. Well, let me touch policies, but also starting with regulations and standards. What is great is the enthusiasm around the future power sources for flight. It's great because that will mean that we have the future of flight in the next decades. However, at the moment, nobody knows the technologies and the technicalities well enough to create the technology that we are all so interested and keen on. So what we would need in the first place is regulations and standards on the technology itself regarding safety and the operations. So what technology, how to use it, how to certify it, how to get it in the sky. I heard my colleague from Airbus that ICAO has already taken some initiatives forward and promised to work on this. I don't know what is the role of EASA in Europe to enhance the regulation regarding electric and hydrogen aircraft. how can EASA then maybe expedite the work by ICAO? I'm not so familiar with the, let me say, the steps taken on both sides of Atlantic. But we need standards and regulation on the technicalities in the first place. I listed many of the programs and research initiatives now ongoing in Europe. They do look at some of these points, and hopefully now the two industry alliances established by the Commission, the one on zero emission aviation, meaning basically electric and hydrogen aircraft, and the one on renewables and low carbon fuels, meaning SAF. Hopefully these alliances will be then fed by these ongoing research programs with the data, and hopefully these alliances will then also make way to the regulation by the authorities that are included in these alliances. So good work, but in very early stages today. Then if I look at the current Fit for 55 regulation, there's the AFIR regulation, which basically means for airports the mandated provision of ground power for aircraft. And then there's this Refuel EU Aviation, which is the mandate for use of SAF. And from the Finnish perspective, as I told, we have 20 airports. Some of them are very small. It would be important that these regulations would not cover the smallest airports, because the investments for like ground power, fixed ground power in an airport having 2 flights a day makes no sense. So hopefully the final conclusions and texts out of the negotiations take this into account. Then there's the 10T regulation update ongoing. For airports, it means the mandated provision of preconditioned air for aircraft at stands. Again here, such investments at small airports would not make any sense if you calculate the abatement cost of a ton of carbon. But then we get to the difficulty here, which is the financing of all this future. We have the EU taxonomy, some parts of it already established, and more details to come. Basically, taxonomy says that airports are not sustainable. Which is good is that the provision of power to green, provision of power of alternative sources to aircraft is excluded in the taxonomy, as some other details regarding the airport infrastructure. But in general, the taxonomy sends a message to the investors that airports are not such a good target for investments, which then deteriorates the airports, let me say, development of their businesses in the long run, and naturally reduces then the income and the sources of funding from your own pocket to do green investments. So it's an unfortunate cycle. After the pandemic, or during the pandemic, I was myself writing applications for the RRF funding to make some green investments in Finland. Unfortunately, not a penny or a cent was got for the investments that we had in mind 2 years ago. And then again, regarding funding, there are very strict rules on state subsidies for airports. Hopefully those rules would be eased in such a way that once they cover green investments at airports, they would be excluded from the overall view of state aid, and could also make future investments easier for airports. Well, a long answer, but a very, very vital and crucial scope for the future of flight. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm seeing we're slowly running out of time, so maybe Peter, very quickly on your side, what do you see?
Yeah. So I think we are in a good position already, because the task force I explained, we have set up. EASA is already part in that. The DGAC is very much supporting the regulation working group we have in France. So I think in Europe, we see a good support of the regulatory bodies to bring this forward. I think we have to be careful that we are coming up with the right regulation in terms of granularity for different sizes of application of hydrogen, and also the support of entities like EASA internationally to support other authorities in order to bring them up to speed.
Yeah, I'd just like to add here, whilst the outlook is positive in terms of the proposals that have been made to mandate the use of SAF, it does come at a higher cost, and it's not all done. There are, in the detail, a lot of issues that need to be resolved. It's crucial that we don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. In other words, set such high standards around sustainability. I mean, clearly we want sustainable solutions that reduce emissions, but some of the rules around feedstocks that are being proposed could actually limit us. We've also got to put in place the processes, and EASA may have a role to play there in terms of monitoring how much SAF is being used, and are we meeting the targets we're setting. So there's an awful lot of detailed work still to be done to execute the ideas that are being put on the table.
Yeah, clearly it's collaboration as we discussed. Jan-Peter, what's your view again as an EA?
Well, if I may, I see that there's a question slide as well, that's sort of touching on the same thing. If I could direct a comment to that. It says about the investments, where do they come from? And I think it's connected a little bit to this question as well. I'm heavily involved in a global project under the OECD umbrella and International Transport Forum on SAF. It's a global group, and we're working on what policies could really increase production and the uptake, and how can we accelerate the work on SAF, because this is going to, as you say, 50+% of the emission reductions in 2050 will come from SAF, approximately. Now, what we're seeing is that we need investment bodies to engage. So the policies will need to support that SAF will be labeled as green as long as it is sustainable. The taxonomy is one instrument that can be used to say what is sustainable and not, but we also need some global measures, some global mechanisms for the possibility to, for example, trade SAF, whether it's a book and claim system, which means that you can produce SAF in an African country, you can use it in that country, but then I can buy it, the quota, I'll buy the fuel on my side, but so I've booked a reduction in emissions, but it's actually being produced, and value is being created somewhere else and used somewhere else. Those are the kind of mechanisms we need to have in place to accelerate things. I also believe, again, that each and every one of us in this room has a role of talking about why do we need investment into the aviation system, whether it's a research investments or it's actual incentives. I think we all are in a position here to pitch in and talk on behalf of aviation, but then of course, we also need to share knowledge about what are the key challenges, how do we approach them, and then we can see how these policies should be connected to actually increasing investments. And it's just also giving the investment bodies an understanding of aviation. Just one more example I mentioned. A month ago, we had a conference in Oslo on zero-emission regional aviation. We had 11 aircraft manufacturers in the room, 11. We didn't even maybe know it was 11. All these were working with aircraft less than 100 seats, so it's not, you know, your primary focus, Peter, on the neighbors, and they're just having access to aviation and for them to understand how the aviation system works. Some of these are startups, but also to have the energy sector and investors present in the same room and understanding what the aviation challenges are. This is what policy should also contribute to in bringing these players together to address some of these key challenges. I think that will also boost the investment long term, whether it's pension funds or banks or public direct support or other incentives. And of course, the last thing is, I think, on the carbon pricing. We will be very dependent on actually the rise in carbon pricing, and it also depends on the fossil energy prices, how this differentiates, because it's a matter of handling risk and it's a matter of reducing the cost differential between the SAF and the present fuels.
Yeah, thank you, Jan Petter. So maybe we can indeed continue with the questions. So there's a question from David Clark. So airports often control the electricity supply and associated infrastructure used by airport service providers, but they don't always see the urgency in providing renewable supply options or physical infrastructures. So what levers can be pulled to speed up these infrastructure changes?
ADP.
Yeah, unfortunately,
Sure.
Blandine had to leave because of obvious reasons. But
Fortunately, she's not longer there. But I've heard about it. That it is an issue, but I don't know what to do about it.
Cool.
Well, it depends from airport to an airport how different services are provided. If there will be demand for supplying electricity as power source to an aircraft, there will definitely be it available. But is it available by the airport provider, or is it is it arranged by the airline maybe, or the ground handling company, or a energy company?
Well, exactly.
Or whoever. Like you are putting in place charging infrastructure for road cars in Finland on top of the renewables that you already deliver in Finland. So we don't know that yet. But, well, this is a bit a chicken and egg again. So once there is demand, there will definitely be the provision, provided that somebody pays for it.
This is not an airport-only issue. This is the entire energy transition, the entire energy sector. The oil and gas sector has got to move to renewable power and green hydrogen. We need it to make the renewable fuels. Already today, we need hydrogen, and guess what? We need it to be green to get our net emission reduction performance to improve. We'll need it also for the future renewable fuels. If we move beyond the heifer-based renewable fuel that we've got today to power to liquid, you need even more renewable power to generate the green hydrogen to then combine with carbon to create a liquid hydrocarbon fuel. So this is a massive, and actually the Nordic region is particularly well advantaged. I mean, we as Neste are already looking at where can we develop these power to liquid projects in the future, and the cost of renewable power is one of the most critical. It's a feedstock. It is one of the most critical drivers. And where those incentives are there to help, like in the US with the recent Inflation Reduction Act, which is all about renewable power, or to a very significant extent, those will be the regions that get, and indeed even places like Chile, those will be the regions that will see the first production of either, from the renewable power, then renewable fuels that can ultimately then be brought to the airports. So it's about the aviation fuel as much as it is about the power that's required for the airports.
Better?
I'll just have a short comment on this. I think one of the key ways of accelerating things is to find pilot projects. We need to identify what strengths do I have, or what strengths do you have? And then we need to collaborate on developing pilots or new projects and value chains that sort of prove how this can be solved before you start escalating, before you start scale things. And this is really, so when France are working on hydrogen hubs, we need to collaborate and not have a competition on, well, competition is interesting, but of course we need to collaborate to really try to identify and establish these value chains, whether it also could be on SAF, that we from one state perspective could find a regional development with a developing economy, because no country should be left behind. So also there we see this element of finding together to really prove to ourselves and the world that this can be done. And then the investors will pick up. And they'll be looking at what are the consequences, what is the potential in this. And we need these narratives, we need these proofs to see how we can develop.
So Ansgar is asking, what are the price developments of SAF compared to traditional fuels as production is scaled up, Jonathan? I think that's a question for you.
Yeah, so it costs more than fossil fuel, as I've mentioned before, but actually you're comparing apples with pears because you've got one which is not going to destroy the planet and the other which is. So clearly we need the carbon price to reflect the true cost of fossil fuels, not just jet fuel. So and on the other side of the coin, as we scale up the production with new production technologies, we will get learning benefits and we will get economies of scale. So I do see a convergence. Whether it's 2030, whether it's 2035, I don't know. But there will be a convergence of price. But it won't necessarily be SAF coming down. I think it'll be as much fossil jet fuel being truly priced with the carbon cost. Because unfortunately the future production technologies for SAF are higher cost than the ones we've got at the moment. But I'm sure they will come down as learning benefits and scale comes in. And there's another question here, if I may just address it. Is SAF really environmentally friendly if it comes from food stock that we need to feed people in poor countries? So I'd just like to get this straightened out. We don't use land or crops that would otherwise be used for food stuff, either for humans or for animals. We use waste materials, sometimes from the food production process that literally are waste, or animal fat from and as we look forward, we can see the opportunity to develop to deploy plants on land that otherwise would not be used, or can even improve the biodiversity and soil quality, what we're calling novel vegetable oils. But indeed, there are other waste materials, municipal waste, agricultural waste, and ultimately, as I said, power to liquids. So on that chart where I showed the different production technologies, all of these have a role to play. But just to be really clear, the regulations already out there don't allow us to use crops that would be used for food.
Very clear answer, thank you. So yeah, this brings us to the end of this panel. Yeah, also on this panel, I think we can continue talking for hours. There are some other questions, but yeah, they can be maybe tackled later on, or be when the delegates approach you maybe. I really would like to thank the panelists. It was a really great discussion, really because of your experience and the level of information you brought. It was a very informative session. Blandine, unfortunately, as I announced, didn't feel too well, so unfortunately she had to leave, but also I would like to thank her, Peter, Mikko, Jan, Petter, and Jonathan. Excellent contribution, many thanks. I also would like to thank the delegates for the really good, pertinent questions. Yeah, I think that the message is we have to continue collaborating. This is the only way if we really want to decarbonize, and it's clear that airports have an important role in that journey. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. In a moment, Patrick Key is going to come back on stage to summarise everything and close the conference. Just before that, we've had some questions about whether the slides will be available. I wanted to just let you know that both the slides and the recordings we've made will be available through the EASA website on the event page, which persists after the event, as well as a kind of placeholder for all these things. So you'll be able to get those then. Thank you for being, from my side, just for being such a very responsive audience. And Patrick, over to you.